everybody. Thank you so much for being here and welcome back to Beyond Evolution, the podcast that brings incredible minds at the forefront of AI to help us all stay informed and navigate this fast-changing world. I'm your host, Mario Spano, and today I'm joined by Vilas Dhar, president of Patrick J. McGovern Foundation and one of the world's leading voices on using technology for social good. Today's episode is titled AI for Good, Designing AI Systems with Purpose, and Vilas will help us navigate this topic. Welcome, Vilas. So happy and truly honored to have you here with us today.
Mario, thanks for that incredible welcome. I'm really excited for our conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. I'm very excited to get into it. And as we were talking before, we've had very incredible people on here, and it's very inspiring and instills a lot of hope to talk to people like you who really want to use these tools for good. So I'm excited to get into it. But before we dive in, we begin with a mindful moment. We call this our gift to you, our listeners, and our guests, and really our gift to ourselves, the gift of presence. In a world pulling us in every direction, we like to pause. We like to fully arrive here together, grounded in our shared humanness, before stepping into the vast unknown of our future with AI. So this is essentially just kind of a 3-minute meditation or so, and I'll guide you kind of the beginning steps into it, and then we'll just take a couple minutes to ourselves to really release what is not needed here and fully arrive in the present before we dig in. Does that sound good?
Sounds amazing.
Awesome. This is my favorite part. Anytime that I do anything with any project, I incorporate mindfulness, and it's wonderful. Men's groups and podcasts. So let's get started. Just a quick preface. If you're driving, of course, please feel free to pull over or take a break. Definitely do not close your eyes or try and zone out while you're driving. You can feel free to forward this 3-minute section. So we'll just kind of get comfortable, and wherever you are in your seat or lying down. And we'll just begin to breathe in through the nose and out through our mouth at your own pace. Just take deep breaths in, trying to hold at the top for a second or two. And just let it all go out through the mouth. And what we want to envision here is just letting everything that we've brought to this moment go. All the stresses and the worries, all the to-dos, all the places to be, everything in the future, we just want to let that go and allow ourselves to fully arrive here. Continue breathing at your own pace. And really the entire goal here with these 2 to 3 minutes is so simple. Our goal is just to return to our natural state before all of the to-do lists and the busy days and the hustle. What's underneath all of that is true calm, compassion, groundedness, and connectedness with ourselves in the present moment. So as you settle deeper into the space, you can just begin to breathe in and out through your nose. Just focus your attention on your breath, whether it's your stomach moving in and out or the sensation of the air going in and out through your nose. Thoughts are okay, to-dos are okay, everything else that's out there that we carry is okay. But for now, we're just going to allow that to be there, and we're going to simply focus on our breath in this present moment. And we'll just take a couple minutes here on our own, just to be, and I'll bring you out slowly. Okay, we will start to slowly come back at your own pace whenever you're ready. I'm sure most of you have your eyes closed. You can open them, give your neck a good stretch. You can reach up to the sky, stretch the rib cage. You can stand up and stretch it out a little bit if you need. Just kind of let it all go. And with that, we are ready to dive in. If you are ready, Vilas.
I'm ready. What a joyful and beautiful way to start a conversation. Thank you, Mario.
You're welcome. I'm glad you enjoyed it. All right. Yeah, Vilas, obviously you are a very accomplished and incredible person from what I've seen online. I'm very excited to meet you and get into your career and obviously talk about AI. But first, I love to ask people, what is your story? Where are you from? Tell me more about you. And if you'd like to, you can share, any kind of hobbies outside of work, daily rituals, other passions that people may not know, anything that keeps you grounded, present, balanced, happy, and alive.
Oh, well, that's a lovely question. Thank you. I grew up right in the center of the country almost, about 2 hours south of Chicago in the middle of rural Illinois, with cornfields and soybeans and hundreds of miles in every direction. And I was the child of immigrants in a household where my parents were trying to figure out how to make ends meet and how to make sure that they were able to build community and a sense of common purpose for not just our family, but for the people around us. My parents made friends with an Amish family. And I remember these amazing weekends where we would pile into the car and drive out to their home, and we'd spend the entire day with them milking cows, baling hay, hanging out in the barn that had a massive trampoline in it, and sitting down, maybe most importantly, to dinner with them in a house where everything they served was produced pretty much on their farm. And then on other weekends where they would pile into a van and drive into town and they would come to our home. And I remember my mother would make them dosas, South Indian meals. And I remember them all kind of sitting with us on the floor in the dining room and everybody enjoying South Indian food. And maybe today that feels a little bit more common, but certainly in 1980s Illinois, it didn't seem like every day. It was really beautiful. And as I think back on it, I'm just so amazed and surprised by what a melding of cultures, of perspectives, of moments that those lunches really represented. Our world is full of incredible people and incredible diversity of thought, of intelligence, of emotion, of creativity. I think there's something so special about all of the things that make us so human.
Beautiful. That was so well described that I was literally there on the floor with you and your family, and it was a beautiful scene. Thank you for sharing that. You said you're from Illinois. I'm from Ohio, so
Oh, there you go.
yeah, all Midwesterners have a lot in common. We're all very pretty kind and outgoing and nice. So I appreciate that perspective, and thank you for sharing.
Yeah, of course.
So yeah, now kind of, moving more into your career path. Obviously, you're a lawyer, entrepreneur, human rights advocate, and now you're leading one of the most prominent philanthropic organizations at the intersection of AI and society. So tell me how you got from the farm in Illinois to getting as deep into this crazy world of AI as you are now, and why you're so passionate about AI for public good.
I'm very happy to, and I have to tell you, it's a bit of a wild story. So we'll get into it. It's it's taken me lots of different directions, and again, it all goes back to where I grew up, just outside of Champaign, Illinois. I sometimes think that I grew up as a product, maybe not of different places, but almost of different times. I'll tell you what I mean by that. I mean, I grew up in, Southern Illinois, rural Illinois in the 1980s. And that was a time when I think America was trying to figure out who we would become, right? We had political environment that felt particularly fractionated. We had a cultural environment that was still developing, and it was a fascinating place to grow up, again, as an immigrant in a community that didn't have so many immigrants. But two other things that were happening almost simultaneously. One was, when we had the chance, we would go to India where my parents' family lived, and we would visit them and stay with them for an entire summer, effectively, in a community that didn't yet have running water or reliable power, that had maybe one telephone for an entire village. It almost felt like a pre-industrial society, a place where everybody knew each other, where people were still hungry and had medical issues that felt so foreign to somebody who grew up in the US, but a place where people came together to support and strengthen each other. And then one other time period, exactly in that town I grew up in, Champaign, Illinois, was also this very unique constellation of technical capacity called the National Center for Supercomputing Applications. It was one of 5 centers in America that were right at the forefront of the biggest, most powerful computers and the imagination and visionaries of people who were trying to figure out what to do with them. It was the birthplace of the modern web browser, something called NCSA Mosaic. And it was where many people came to study who went on to go found great technological companies. And so I was very young when I got interested in computers. I remember being, 7 or 8 and having a chance to run through supercomputing, Cray supercomputers in the NCSA buildings. And I learned to code very early, and I wrote my first program probably when I was, 10 or 11, my first video game. So I was always close to technology, and I was fascinated by it. The ways that it expanded my sense of what was possible, the ways that I was able to use it to take on an idea that existed only in my mind, but by applying computing to it to turn it into a reality that could be shared with other people. So that was great. So I studied computer science and bioengineering, and I became very fascinated with AI. This was 20 odd years ago, back before it was an everyday household word, and began to really understand both technically how it worked, and worked as a researcher in the space and won research awards, but also began to really consider how it might be applied to help people's lives. That very first set of projects I did at the NCSA was around a project called Riverweb, that was an NSF funded study of something that felt very far away from computing. It had to do with how the people who had lived in the basin of the Mississippi River over thousands of years had come together to forge new cultures and civilizations and communities, all the way extending to American westward colonial expansion through East St. Louis. It was a complex set of human dynamics and behaviors, of environmental considerations, of primary source historical materials that maybe had never even been looked at since they were stored and archived. And the question I was faced with was, how could we use rudimentary AI at the time to try to lift out stories of people, of communities and cultures, and make them relevant to people today? So more on that another time if you ever want to go deeper, but I will tell you I started my career there in technology as a computer scientist and an AI researcher. And my curiosity about how these tools could be used to shape the world led me to really begin to interrogate systems of power. I ended up going to law school and worked in communities around the world to support democratic values, the practice of having voice, of being able to access government services, and saw again and again that even when we were thinking about questions of human dignity, technology always played a role, because it might provide a solution, and sometimes it might provide the very problem that we were trying to address. So I did that. I, came back to the US and started a number of different organizations, but found my way back to a question that was the start of my career. If we can build amazing and incredible technologies that can reshape the future, how do we ensure that we build the tools that we need rather than the tools that just give us more profit or more business outcome? The tools that are driven by purpose and are driven by a common interest in our shared well-being. And that kind of brings me to the work that I do today. You mentioned it. I have the incredible privilege and honor of leading a 21st century philanthropy, a foundation that's focused on building an ecosystem for AI for public purpose, to ensure that we can realize this promise that you and I have talked about, a promise of a world where AI doesn't replace humans or take away our work or our democratic values or our economic dignity, but instead supports us to be even better.
Wow, beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. The thing that really stands out to me is what you said about technology essentially being the biggest cause of harm and the biggest potential solution for like very big human problems. So I'd love to hear more about that as we get into this episode. But I'm first and foremost curious. When did you first go to India and experience that? Because that's an incredible experience for you at such a young age, and obviously that being your family there as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, the first time I ever went, I was probably 3 years old, and
Okay.
it was a tough trip, Mario. I got malaria on that trip of all things. It was not a super comfortable and easy time, but as I said, I mean, the things I was always buoyed by was the ways that I felt supported by family and by community and by culture.
Yeah. Well, what an incredible juxtaposition from a young age to go from
Hmm.
the Midwest to India and back and see the difference. I can see how that would lead to a different perspective than a normal kid in India or in Champaign, Illinois. I think one of the best things that people can do with their lives is travel to a different area because you learn so much. It's such an expanded view, right? So I can see how that has probably shaped what you do today. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Beautiful. Tell me more about Patrick J. McGovern Foundation and kind of like just high level, like what are the main projects, or I mean maybe you could even say main goals of the organization? How big are you guys? How long have you been around?
Sure, I'm happy to. So the foundation really came out of this conviction that many of the traditional practices of philanthropy, which often have been about making grants and donations, underserved the populations that we think are most vulnerable in the world. And when we think about the ways that our society is changing, there are certainly matters of kind of those base and direct needs, right? Enough food and medicine to ensure safety and security and access to education. But overlaying those vulnerabilities is also this transformation that's really being enabled by technology. For example, what we've seen with the advent of the internet and the creation not just of all of the incredible things that the internet has let us do, excuse me, but rather also the increasing digital divide that's been created. The ways that communities that have access are often able to access better jobs,
Hmm.
to have better information about their health, to be more connected with each other. But communities that are left out, that don't have even the baseline access of a physical infrastructure that lets them access the internet, don't have access to those things. That we create a world where we say many more services are available online, but if you don't have access to a computer, a tablet, or a phone, you just will be left out.
Right.
But in that world, well, what about new advances like AI? And how do we ensure that we build these tools prospectively looking forward in ways that minimize vulnerability, that create greater opportunity? The foundation essentially steps forward as optimists, not necessarily about technology, but about people. We believe that we can shape these tools in ways that actually create an incredible benefit for everyone. That to do so requires more than just technologists in Silicon Valley, but requires all of the people across the planet that believe in common welfare and common benefit, nonprofit organizations, governments, community leaders, and individuals. And so we work together to do a number of things. The first is to demonstrate that AI can be used for public purpose. And I'm happy to tell you a lot more about that, but some really incredible examples of where we're using these tools to do good in the world. The second, to acknowledge that the decisions we need to make about our future shouldn't be made just by government policymakers or by technologists, but should be made by all of us. And we should invest in ensuring that we are all literate, aware, and understand what's happening so that we can make better decisions. And a third part of what we do is to consider that a lot of the challenges we will face over the next 50 years are actually relatively novel and new. that we might need new institutions to help us make these decisions going forward. That much like when we decided that we needed to take on public health and disease in the 1930s, the answer was to build entirely new institutions like certified medical schools and county boards of health, national research institutions, and places like the Centers for Disease Control. What might we need to build for an AI enabled era? What would those institutions look like? These are some of the things that we do to create a better social resilience, not just to the changes that AI will create, but to actually direct what those changes might be in a way that makes everybody's life better.
Amazing. And how do we do that? How do we make sure that our world, especially with AI, is shaped and crafted and made by all of us? What would you say is kind of the higher level easy answer to that, or general direction? Or is there an
Well,
easy answer, or is it completely unknown still, and we're still navigating, figuring it out as everything develops?
yeah. Well, there's a too easy answer, and that one is, you know, we've done pretty well as a species when we come together to make shared decisions. And for AI, it's almost exactly the same thing. We need to make sure the decisions we make about AI aren't made by a few, but are made by all of us together. The nuance to that gets us into maybe the topics of our conversation today. First, I think we need to show that AI can be used for purpose over profit and build great exemplars of what happens when you bring the most powerful tools humanity's ever created and apply them to some of the most pernicious challenges that we face. The second is we need to invest in building capacity in government and in civil society, in the private and public sectors, to tangle not just with questions about what technology should we build next, but what moral, social, human considerations should inform that conversation.
Well, that's a good start, and I'm happy that you have an idea of where we should go, because one of the topics, the main themes of this show is just how much is still unknown. And yeah, honestly, it makes me very happy that there is an organization out there like yours, and I'm sure others as well, that are figuring it out and trying to shape our world for good. When did you personally realize that AI either had a massive opportunity to deepen inequality or create new pathways for equity? Like, when was that moment for you personally? Or maybe it was after you joined the foundation.
Oh no, it was much earlier than that. And again, I take you back to that period kind of 25 years ago when we were building these tools. And remember that what we call AI today is it's not a new thing that broke out onto the world stage just a few years ago, but rather is the product of decades of research by some really amazing scholars and engineers. But in those first days, 25 years ago, when I was trying to build AI tools, what I saw was how it fundamentally changed the relationship between those who have power and those who don't.
Mm-hmm.
We were considering ways that we might use AI tools to rebuild educational pathways, to move from being able to just consume what somebody has told you is important to having a system that would look at what you were interested in and serve you more of that content, to let you go deeper and dive down into topics and build a really robust understanding, not just of what happened, but its social causes and the permutations of power and the constructs of social decision making, to build a comprehensive understanding of how our systems are designed and how they are created. I can't think of anything more enabling and empowering than giving somebody who has a strong moral conviction about what the world should look like a deep understanding of how the world is structured. Because when you understand how it works, you can ask the question, how do we ensure that we change the way it works to support what we believe to be just?
Right. And that being the most important piece.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So obviously you deal with, kind of AI applied across many sectors, working at the foundation and I'm sure elsewhere. So where do you see the most promise and opportunity today? Is it healthcare, climate, education? Where do you think Where do you think there's the most opportunity for good in our society with AI?
Well, let me certainly start by giving you a few examples of things that I think are very cool and also are affecting many millions of lives. And I'll give you this narrative through the lens of tools that are being built because they have such incredible promise. And then I want to come back to whether that's the right frame. But here's a few examples for you. The first is the exciting ways in which we might be able to apply AI to help detect disease earlier and to personalize treatment. Now, often when you hear a conversation like this, particularly in today's world, that might be about, how we do cancer detection at some of the richest and most enabled hospital systems in America.
Mm-hmm.
But instead, I want to take you to a very rural health system, in this case, in a place called Rajasthan, where an organization called Kushi Baby has been working for decades to provide better support to women in what are called last mile villages. These are the kinds of villages that you land at an airport, you get in a car, you drive as far as the road goes, and at some point you have to stop and you get out, and maybe you have a bike, and if not, you walk, and you walk for hours sometimes to get to some of these villages. That's how far away they are from the core infrastructure of our modern society.
Wow.
And in those communities, one of the great challenges is ensuring that young mothers have access to the kind of care they need in order to ensure that they can have a safe and healthy pregnancy and give birth to a child who has all of the health benefits possible. For 20 years, they've worked with these communities to understand and track and triage and provide healthcare access and support. But more recently, as they've adopted AI tools, they've been able to take all of that data and running it through new algorithms they've developed. They've discovered things like clusters of villages where the local nutritional practices means that mothers consistently give birth to babies with lower birth weight, a marker of harder challenges in their health journeys. And using AI to identify where these kind of geospatial markers are and where these communities are, they've worked with the government to bring in nutritional supplements and provide better care. And very quickly after doing this work, they were able to measure a meaningful improvement in the health outcomes for these communities. So it's a way of recapturing the promise of AI for healthcare systems, not just in our most privileged environments, but sometimes in our most vulnerable. To use AI tools at scale to cover things like vaccine delivery and ensure that we're efficiently protecting those who are most at risk, to make sure that we're doing population level health measurements, to support nutritional practices and reduce obesity and non-communicable diseases. These are tools that we already know how to build them. Sometimes we're lacking the necessary underlying data, and sometimes the challenges are in political systems around medical delivery and ministries of health. But sometime in the next 5 to 10 years, I very much anticipate that we will have a fundamentally different way of thinking about how we deliver healthcare to some of our most vulnerable people on the planet. That's a tool set in healthcare. Let's move to a different topic. Let's talk about climate, a space where incredible organizations have advocated for humanity for decades on issues like carbon emissions, on mitigating the worst possible effects of poaching, and in ensuring that we can predict extreme weather. I could give you 100 examples from this space, but let me give you just one, which is to address a significant problem these advocacy organizations have faced, that they often have limited insight or data into a particular problem just because of their scale. For example, an advocacy organization that's working in Iceland might know a lot about whale travel patterns and poaching and hunting, but might not have access to really good data about the carbon emissions that are coming from illegal burning of rainforests in order to prepare space for farming that often happens in South America. So if the challenge is this idea of data that sits too far away from those who are using it for advocacy, AI has enabled us to build a new toolkit, and it's called Climate Trace. And it essentially allows us to first track carbon emissions down to the most granular level you could imagine. You can go today onto the system and you can say, I'm sitting now in Boise, Idaho, or somewhere in Ohio or in New York City. Show me all of the carbon emitters around me and show me how much carbon they're putting into the air, or methane or other gases. And we can interweave into that satellite imagery and geospatial intelligence, the self reported emissions of actors on the ground, and now a variety of sensors that are all interlinked that give us incredibly accurate predictions about carbon emissions. Well, what can you do with that, you might ask? Here's an example that comes from the private sector. A steel producer that has bought steel from the same set of plants for the last 50 years and has never changed their practice might ask the question, am I really contributing to the climate crisis and do I need to change my practices? They might go on Climate Trace and say, show me steel producers that can generate the same quality of steel and maybe at the same price point, but have a vastly different carbon profile. And they might be able to identify that there's a factory that produces 1/10 of the carbon emissions they put out to produce steel at the same price. Is a long way of saying that these AI enabled systems that let us gather and create new information around climate might mean that we might have private sector changes in behavior, we'd have stronger advocacy, and you and I, as everyday citizens, Mario, would have a much better understanding of what's happening in the world around us because of climate. I told you I'd give you a couple of examples, and I've done that. And I don't want to give you more, although you can tell how excited I get about this. But I want to say one final thought on this, which is it is easy to start from tools and exemplar projects and talk about AI applications. But I think that might be the wrong place to end because we might build a number of these AI tools, but they might not still solve a more fundamental problem. The real question that I have is how are we building in incentives, values, and participation into the fundamental infrastructure of AI?
Yeah.
We could just reward companies for creating things that get engagement and clicks. Or we could say we as a society value those AI systems that make people healthier, more educated, more resilient. We value the systems where people actually have the ability to architect their own AI applications, where open source and other mechanisms mean that these aren't in controlled environments, but rather are things that we can bring out into the world. And we should begin to think about intentional design, where we're making sure that we're investing in building the AI systems that actually solve these problems as a core part of their purpose. So this is where the translation happens of going from how do we use AI to how do we make sure that AI can be used by anybody with an idea about how to make the world a better place.
Beautiful. Yeah, that was kind of my, I guess, main takeaway from the examples you shared is like it's really informing us and empowering us as humans to change and do better. It's creating a more informed society, and that's beautiful. And that, of course, is my next question is kind of getting into like that's great, but left to our own devices, like will we make better decisions? Will we do the better thing? And of course, that leads us into systems and incentives. So I'm curious if you have like an example of that where intentional design is incorporated and has already shown success in a project that you are involved in or have heard of.
Sure. I mean, so many examples from around the world, but I'll give you a couple of examples that actually come at the government level because they show the possibility of scale. One of the great challenges, and there's a great story about this. I sat at a convening of the United Nations a couple of years ago with the president of a very large tech company. And we were talking about LLMs. And, as you might imagine, particularly for techno optimists, it's easy to stand there and say something like this person said. And what he said, looking out at this audience of world leaders and kind of policymakers from across the globe, was LLMs represent the very best of humanity. And he made that statement unironically and without a lot of nuance and depth. But I had to stop him before he got too far into his argument. Because unfortunately, the LLMs, particularly the ones of a few years ago, didn't represent the best of all of humanity. They maybe represented the best of maybe a billion English speaking, generally global North people who had access to education and technology, who had access to the internet, who spoke great English and wrote on the internet creating the data sets that these LLMs were trained on. But unfortunately, those LLMs left out the community wisdom and the knowledge and the experience of non-English speakers from across the world, from people who didn't have access to contribute to Reddit forums and write online, to people who actually lived lives of incredible purpose and meaning, but just weren't represented in the data that these LLMs were trained on. Well, there's a way to fix that, and that fix comes with intention. We've seen some really incredible work on this space just of incorporating other languages than English into the training sets. From a project from the Indian government called Bhashini that creates an AI infrastructure and ecosystem that's grounded in an LLM that's trained on the vast diversity of languages across the Indian subcontinent, languages and dialects that can number into the hundreds, but allow for the first time for people who are trying to build social and public purpose applications as well as for-profit applications to immediately and in real time communicate with people using their native language. And we're seeing something very similar happen in South America, where a consortium of governments, I think led in primary ways by the Chilean government, are about to release the first Spanish language native trained LLM for use by 60 million plus people across the region. These are open source models. They're not held by a single company. They don't have usage fees attached to them as a part of a licensing agreement. Instead, they're building public infrastructure for public use, creating the kinds of tools that let people say, I know and I have confidence that this is available for me to use. What can I do with it that actually expands my vision of what our communities and our lives should look like?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I didn't even really think about, LLMs being trained on another language other than English. And obviously that serves a certain group of people more than it does others. Would you say, what are the benefits of doing that other than,
Yeah.
capturing the nuances and the energy and the feel of that culture?
Well, you're getting to it a little bit, but often what people think of when they think of LLMs being trained on data is it's trained on words and on languages. But what do languages really encapsulate? When we speak, we don't just put, our complex thoughts into a bunch of words and throw it out into the world. We shape them through our experience, through our expectations, through our social norms. That other languages carry much more than just a different word set. They carry attitudes and expectations and behaviors that are shaped by culture.
Right.
Expressions are languages are an expression of values and behaviors. And so when we build a system that's embedded exclusively across a particular kind of language set, we're also embedding into it the values and choices that have been made in shaping those languages. Sometimes those values, to give you a concrete example, are about a tension between individualism and community identity, issues about age and what we value and find virtue in, about professional versus informal discussions, about how languages encode our expectations of how somebody should speak or should sound. So the way that we address this is by broadly diversifying and broadening the set of data, the kinds of stories and lessons and languages that are represented in training these tools. So that when we build these large foundation models that share a promise of serving everyone, they do so because they're trained on the needs, on the expectations, on the values of everyone.
Right. Yeah, it's trained more inclusive, so then it would be more inclusive. Is that kind of the main point?
Exactly right. And it's not a panacea. Just by including more data doesn't mean that we get more inclusive systems, but it's a really great starting point. And on top of that, we can then build.
Right. Yeah, and that was kind of my next question is like how would that incentivize people to do good with AI as compared to, someone in India using an LLM that's trained just on English?
Well, there's a few different elements to this, right? One is this piece of linguistic diversity and community participation and ownership, a sense and a feeling of agency that you can build for the people in your community. There's a second part to it, which is the need for these open source, open model weight distributions that mean that people can get access to these tools without having to go through a commercial relationship or a partnership. You may remember the kind of media frenzy that accompanied the release of something called DeepSeek very early this year,
Hmm.
which was a tool set that was given away freely to the world with a set of competencies and capabilities that were pretty close to what you might have been able to get commercially, but they were free. And it meant that a lot of people who might have chosen to build on top of a system like the ones that were commercially available, the ones that maybe had these limitations in how they were trained, but also had a significant set of safeguards, now we're pushed to these kind of out in the wild counterparts that didn't have the same investment in boundary conditions and safety and trust. And what we're seeing now is this challenge that emerges where, because we don't yet have true community ownership and participation, people have to make suboptimal choices about what kind of things they build. They have to make a choice about either going to a closed ecosystem because they know it has an investment in trust and safety, or going to an open one and having to build it entirely themselves. There is an alternate way. An alternate way where we really begin to think of AI infrastructure as what's called a digital public good, or part of a digital public infrastructure, where we have the basic rules of kind of how these systems will be built and distributed. And they're part of a public and civic fabric where we have open source values that guide the kinds of things that are created around transparency of code and around people being able to contribute to their growth. And at the same time, some managed and government regulated provisions around safety and security to ensure that whatever we build, there are still some boundary constraints on how they might create new vulnerabilities for all of us.
Hmm. Very interesting. Yeah, this is like probably the highest level, that I've thought about AI in our modern society and its development and its effects. But it's also like very specific in a way as well.
Mhm.
It has very, very specific effects on a
That's
lot
right.
of people. It's very interesting.
And a lot of people is such a key element of that, Mario, because these things that we're talking about, when we talked about the internet in the early days, and I remember there was a time when we still talked about the number of users of the World Wide Web in the hundreds of thousands or millions of people. And it was primarily people who had access to a computer and a dial-up modem and knew how to use, billboards and other things. Today's world looks very different from that, right? For the billions of people on the planet, having access to and having a dignity in a digital environment has become core to their ability to navigate life. And with AI, that's only going to be even more pervasive. So the things that we're talking about in this conversation today, they will affect every person's life on this planet, whether, and unfortunately, whether they choose to have it do so or not, which just continues to embed the gravity of the decisions that are in front of us. I'll give you an example from a different part of the AI landscape that have less to do with the technical decisions we make, or maybe I'll say it a different way. Some of the work that I've done over the last few years has been directly engaged with multilateral government institutions like the United Nations.
Okay.
And in many ways, those institutions are, again, they feel quite far away from the offices of the large tech companies in Silicon Valley.
Right.
They're if you ask the average person, we all have a perception that maybe they are slow to move, they are not so effective. But in many ways, they are the only thing we have for multinational, multilateral cooperation. And so I've had the great privilege of working with them to understand how the world outside of the US thinks about AI and what we need to do to build a more robust participation and collaboration among them. And just in the last few weeks, in the late summer, early fall of 2025, the UN has passed a set of resolutions that have created the first concrete bodies for governing these tools. A scientific body that connects the best scientists in the world to understand what's happening with AI and give us strategies on how to take it forward. A forum to share best practices in how we regulate and consider these technologies. I share this with you because there's a really core truth that I want to make sure we really underscore in this conversation, which is We have proven that humanity is very, very good at innovating technology, that we can do that fast and we can do some really amazing things with it. But this is a time where we have to expand our scope of innovation beyond technology to institutions, to recognize that the technologies have effects on people's lives that we can't always see up front. And we need ways to manage them, sometimes to police them, sometimes to encourage them. We need to innovate institutions with the same speed that we innovate technology.
Right.
And that's not a question of code or algorithms or data. It's a question about something fundamentally human. How do we come together to make hard and complex decisions? How do we share what we know and learn from each other? How do we engage in a curiosity that actually makes us better? It goes back to where we started the conversation. How do we encourage a diversity of viewpoints? Nowhere in these words are words of supercompute capacity or algorithmic design or neural networks. These are fundamentally human challenges.
Absolutely. That's so good to hear. And that's the point that we come back to almost every single episode. It's like everyone thinks that, robots are taking over, but really it's like it's been created from the foundation of humanity. And the most important thing comes back to our humanity every single time. So I'm happy that you spoke to that. Do you think that the UN is accomplishing that goal with creating that scientific body that we need to develop and solidify as fast as technology itself is developing? Or is there a better system? And then how does what the UN is doing relate to what America is doing and kind of like the rate of development there? Because from what I've seen and read, it doesn't seem like we're moving very fast. It seems like it's kind of a free for all with AI right now, and there's not a lot of rules in place as far as our government is concerned.
I think that's unfortunately a pretty accurate description that we aren't moving very fast. There's a lot happening. There are some really smart people who care deeply, who are trying to create new pathways and new bodies of work around this. But let me say a couple of things. One is I want to be clear that I think, unfortunately, the starting point on government policy or regulation is people will say we need government policy to constrain or limit what tech companies are doing. And I think that's a bad starting point because while it is the case that, of course, we need government to engage in an oversight and regulatory function, the responsibility we give to our policymakers is much bigger than just make sure that tech companies don't do anything too bad.
Right.
We classically have asked governments to come forward with a new vision of what a positive future should look like. And to me, that is the greatest opportunity is if our policymakers step forward and said, we have understood what the technologies might allow us to create. And we think the role of government is to do the following things, to invest public funds in the research and development necessary to really realize AI's potential, to create pathways for training and skilling and education, not just so we create more AI scientists and data engineers, but so every person in our society really understands what the possibility and promise of these tools are and how to use them. If we said we were willing to invest and create a public capacity for AI that's equivalent to the private sector, that was able to hold the fundamental resources of compute and data to hire talent and say we can build the kind of AI infrastructure that addresses the problems we've talked about on this call. This is what I think government policy could do. Now, I'm not hopelessly naive, right? I know that this doesn't feel like the way that we are trending. But I do want to make sure that we plant a staff in the sand and say, just because that's where our inertia is doesn't mean that's the inevitable outcome. And that
Right.
means that we need to encourage these institutions to take baby steps sometimes, to go out and begin to think about multilateral governance of AI, not with some single comprehensive instrument, but by beginning to establish these modalities, these different frames and bodies that can begin to take up different parts of the AI debate and make sure that we're prepared. It's a start. It's by no means a satisfying, hey, we've established the beachhead and everything from here on out is easy. But instead, like all hard things, it is an attempt to say, let's balance our capacity to govern with what our technology makes possible. And ensure that even if different governments get caught up in short term or local thinking, that there's a momentum built among all of the people of the world to say, this is something that's more important to us than regional or local politics. This is something that we have to get right for future generations, for all of us.
Right. Yeah, and I mean it's such a massive shift, you know, and I'm really happy that people like you are out there who really care about this and are really doing what they can to get us off on the right foot. How much of what you do at the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation that is like actually interacting with governments, or is that just kind of you personally?
Oh no, it's a lot of what we do, not just through our own work, but through a set of partners who have emerged as kind of the leading policy support institutions here in the United States and around the world. We think a lot about how we can support, both through thought leadership and through resource provision, the set of institutions, the ecosystem that really is supporting this conversation.
Right.
And I think we've been very successful in that. This is not a discussion that requires one strong voice, but many. And those institutions might have different points of view, and we're very much okay with that. In fact, we want to encourage it because in the space of public discourse and public debate, in productive disagreement is where we begin to get these really high quality, high value decisions about what the world should look like.
Right. Yeah, that's very important. Lay it all out there. What what do you think is the kind of like primary and secondary kind of sentiment from the governments that you've interacted with as far as AI? And did they care as much as you? Do they realize they need to kind of get on this, or is there just a ton of red tape and you know, kind of at least perceived red tape in the way, or are they kind of taking their time, or do they not really care about it as much as other endeavors or other topics that's on their table?
Well, let me give you I mean, that's quite a broad question. So let me give you a somewhat broad answer, recognizing that there is a lot of nuance here. But what I can tell you unequivocally is I don't think there's a government in the world today that doesn't recognize that AI is going to be a transformative force in the lives of their citizens and their people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it doesn't matter where I go. I was recently in sub-Saharan Africa and met with the president of Zambia and a number of others. Um, it doesn't matter where I go. I think people are keenly interested. They are curious. They are asking lots of great questions. And they are trying to figure out what their role and place will be in a world that seems like it's careening towards us pretty quickly. One where AI becomes an enabler of potentially a massive economic and political transformation. I think what you see, though, is a couple of things that I think we can address. One is a very differential level of capacity and capability. You know, there are governments that are right out at the forefront of this transformation and are thinking about how they deploy AI based tools in government services already in ways that they define policy making and regulation and tax collection and all kinds of things. And there are others where there just isn't enough domestic capacity around things like compute access, or the talent pool isn't robust enough. So one of the key questions has been, how do we ensure that there is a uniform mechanism for governments to be able to evaluate where they are on their AI journeys and make sure they have the resources to be able to really accelerate through them? And so we've worked with UNESCO to build a set of models and interventions around something called a readiness assessment methodology that I think now has been taken by more than 80 countries. And when they go through that process, they come out the other side with a global and cohesive view of what resources they have at the country level, what resources they'd like to build, where their strategic frameworks might be, how they want to think about a set of comprehensive policies around AI investment and regulation. And it puts them at least on even footing to begin the next stage of their process, which often is both regulatory and legislative reform, and sometimes is participating in regional or global kind of conversations and activities about AI. So
Right.
that's a long answer to a short question. Let me say it to you one different way, which is I think there's There is not a government in the world today that doesn't recognize how important this is. And it's our responsibility to equip them to be able to take hold of both the opportunity and minimize the risks ahead.
Right. Yeah, and it sounds like what you're trying to do is provide the framework for them to know where they're at, know where they want to go, and help them get there. Kind of like how a lot of corporations don't have an AI policy still. So there's a lot of people out there who are developing businesses to do just that, help them navigate through that journey.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah. Well, that is a lot of good information, high level information. I think we'll keep moving here. One question I do have is, we've talked. That's still kind of bigger picture. Is we've talked a lot about on this podcast how historically speaking, the rich tend to get richer because of compound interest. For one very first example, and access and opportunity and all of that. I'm curious, do you think that AI will exacerbate that trend? And how do we ensure that these systems are designed to serve public person and not just private profit?
Yeah, it's a super critical question. I think the easy starting point to the answer is what these AI tools will do will be entirely driven by the decisions we make. There is a path where AI tools will increase inequality in massive ways, will displace labor, will shake the very foundations of what our economic system is built on, will create a much more unequal world.
Mm-hmm.
But that to me is not a fear of, it's not something that I'm scared that AI will do. It's something that I'm scared that people will do by making decisions. Let me give you an example. I recently spoke with someone who told me the story of a shipyard owner who has a number of welders in their employ. And I think something like 30 welders who come in every day and they do their work. And the owner of the shipyard now has a decision to make. And the decisions are the following. They could go out and invest a lot of money to bring in some machines that do the work of these welders, that essentially displace them and take away their jobs. And that would be quite profitable. Or they could do nothing and they could keep their human welders. Or maybe there's a third option where they could bring in a piece of machinery that requires 30 skilled operators, 30 people who understand welding, but maybe does the work of 100 or 200 or 300. That shipyard owner might have a bunch of questions. One of those would be, wait, do I have the capacity to really invest in this third way and protect all these jobs? Where am I going to get the financing for it? And one might say, well, that should be something that government regulators and policymakers should be thinking about, is can we make available financing mechanisms that let business owners make better choices that both increase productivity and maintain or even increase the hiring that they do? It's so easy to get dropped into an easy narrative that says AI will displace workers, it'll take people's jobs away, and it'll just make more money for the owners of the business. And that might be true, but we don't build societies in easy ways. Sometimes it's hard work, and we have to actually help balance these more complex and sophisticated questions to incentivize the kinds of behaviors that prioritize public welfare as much as they do private profit. The answer to your question is I absolutely think that there are ways that AI might lead to a much more equitable world. One where we increase productivity and change the ways that people have access to goods and services, where more people have more access to more things and are able to find time in their lives for the things that give them purpose and dignity, of leisure, sure, but of creativity and art. The question isn't whether it's possible, and the question isn't what AI will lead to. The question is, what will we come together to prioritize and say, this is absolutely integral to what an AI future must look like. And that's the only AI future we're going to accept.
Right. Coming back to the human, as always. It's not just these systems taking over. It's us. What are we doing, and how are we going to make these decisions moving forward?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for instilling that hope. I feel like I'm usually the eternal optimist, but I feel like here I'm kind of have to be the cynical pessimist, so you can really deliver the facts and bring us back up. Because that's always where we end up, is realizing that this world and the direction it's going is so full of opportunity and hope
Hmm.
and potential.
Well, I will tell you, I very much am an optimist, and I like that label. I'm a very hopeful person. But the things that I'm optimistic about, and I said this earlier, but it's worth underscoring, is I'm not an optimist that technology will fix everything. You hear that in all of my answers. My optimism is about people, that we are actually very good at coming together when we want to make good decisions about our future. And if technology empowered us, I think we could make decisions that would transform what our society is capable of.
Absolutely. I think I might know at least part of the answer to this question by now, but
Mm.
I want to ask it anyways. How do you think that AI will redefine what it means to be human?
I had somebody ask me something very similar recently, and it was a faculty member at a community college in New Jersey, and she asked me the question, how will it change human agency? And here's my very easy answer. AI cannot, will not, does not change what it means to be human. In fact, if anything, it challenges us to remember what it is to be human and to celebrate it. That intelligence isn't just a function of randomized statistical practices or how much compute you can throw at it, or even having perfect recall and information and knowledge. Intelligence is still about empathy. It's about creativity. It's about moral imagination. That being human isn't the fact that we can calculate the product of eight digit primes in our heads, but rather that we can understand that an economic decision that means that a kid goes hungry is something that should strike us as something that is despicable and horrible and not something we should do. That our ability to make those kinds of judgments that are couched in moral reasoning, a sense of justice, but maybe most importantly in love for each other, AI is never going to take that away from us, that it cannot change what it means to be human.
Beautiful. Such a good answer. The best one that we've had yet, for sure. And that's what, that's something we've talked about in the past on this show is how crucial it's going to be for younger generations to get in touch with all the things you just mentioned: empathy, creativity, meaning, moral reasoning, love, emotional intelligence. Because, if anything, AI might take over the things that are kind of boring to us,
Mhm.
and it can't replace that, and it never will. So it's important for us to really lean into the most beautiful parts of ourselves as humans.
That's right.
What do you think are the risks if we fail to design AI intentionally? What do you think is at stake for humanity? And again, kind of being that cynical side, or just saying like, hey,
Yeah.
what if we don't do what Vilas Dhar is helping us to realize we need to do? What happens?
Yeah. Well, I think the greatest challenge is we build a culture of abundance without equitable distribution. What I mean by that is we build a world where anything is possible, but not for everyone. And in fact, just for a few. It's a world where AI takes us out of our jobs and replaces it with drudgery. It gives us plenty of time, but no access to the things that make that time useful, that create a space for us to be in the world without a sense of belonging. And I think it's quite scary. I think we saw what happened when social media, without intentional design and without social conscience, came out into the world and was prioritized and profited from taking our attention without delivering value back to us. We saw the ways it changed our commitment to trust and confidence and information, but maybe much more pernicious, it changed the very environment of mental health for all of us, but particularly for those who are young adults who are just trying to find a sense of identity. AI is that times 10,000 or a million or a billion or however you want to put it. It is the thing that will potentially force us to question every assumption on which our society is built. And if we don't step in and respond to that with a statement of values and principles that put human lives, communities, and interests at the center, then I worry that we will create a world that isn't worth living in. Now, that's the darkest possible timeline, and you have encouraged me to go there, and I've shared it with you.
Thank you.
But I don't think it's likely. Again, I'm quite hopeful. I believe that we will come together, that in stories that come to me from people I've traveled across the world really over the last few years talking to communities about AI, even when people start from a place of deep suspicion and mistrust, when they begin to have the conversation about what AI can do in their lives, I see that fear very quickly become curiosity and interest, and then energetic engagement and interest and positivity. And the question of, well, wait, if AI is capable of doing all this for me, how do I get it to do that? And I think that kind of trajectory that these people have been on in conversations with me is what we need for our society as a whole, to acknowledge the risks, to understand all the bad things that could happen, to recognize the power of these tools, to realize that if we came together to redirect them, they can do some really spectacular things, and then to demand that that is what they do and not merely one more advancement of a tool developed to profit from our time and our energy and our attention.
Right. So almost like what I heard from what you shared about the worst case scenario is it will create inequality. Not it will, but it could.
That's right.
And what it sounds like you're saying is what we need to do now is really sit down together and say, hey, what do we have here? What are the risks? What are the opportunities? And it sounds like you're saying we need to create that structure.
That's exactly right.
That's very insightful. I appreciate you sharing that. And even though you already kind of went to the hopeful side, I had my next question was a hopeful one.
Please.
So please bring us back. So how do you think AI can actually strengthen human connection, resilience, creativity when applied with purpose?
Yeah. We see it happening already in all kinds of ways, whether it's in how artists are using AI tools to create new medium and new messages. I've seen it in actors who talk about using AI to practice their performances before they go out and perform, from artists who are using AI to create new visual landscapes, from musicians who are using it to compose new works entirely that have never been conceived before. And that's just in the artistic space. I think in places like creating shared understanding of complex topics, of the ways that AI might be used in democratic processes to make sure that people feel connected to their decision makers, and in our ability to come up with novel solutions, both engineering and technical, but also behavioral and psychological, to some really pernicious challenges like mental health in the world today. I think AI will become something that, when it's coupled with human ingenuity and creativity, give us entirely new tools to go out and address all of these challenges, but also to think about what kind of things we can do that, even on a daily basis, make the world a better place. I wonder what it would look like to build an AI agent and you gave it one direction and one direction only. Help me be as kind as possible today. And to see what would happen if you did that.
I'm writing that down. That's a good one. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, we've talked a lot on this show about how humans can use AI to essentially just be an extension of them. And it's kind of like before the guitar existed, you couldn't really make that sound, right? And we still kind of can't unless we have the guitar. So that's a tool that was created, one of many that we have the opportunity to use to really create beautiful music, songs, and a way that brings us together. Looking ahead into the future, what do you think that any and every single person who might be listening to this in the entire world has the opportunity to do today to shape our future with AI?
Well, this is the question that I get asked probably more commonly than anything else. And this is the fun stuff. So here's a couple of thoughts. One is for those who are deeply skeptical to take that first moment of dipping your toes in the water and trying to use some of these tools. Not necessarily using them because they fit into a professional cadence or into something big that you're trying to accomplish, but to actually try to find if there's something about them that surprises you, that interests you, that lets you be creative. I'll give you an example that I talk about often. One of my very first uses of an LLM ever, however many years ago, was actually to sit down with my niece and my nephew and say, can we use this to tell a fairy tale to each other?
Hmm.
Build a robust and incredible world of stories that are based on our inputs that aren't merely something that's happening around us, but is something that we're doing. I think that process and practice of just beginning to use these tools can be so helpful because it takes away some of the fear of the unknown. It normalizes us into a presence where we begin to understand what these tools are capable of. And then it lets us ask certain questions like, wait a minute, if I ask the tool to, let's say, show me a picture of a classroom in my community, and it comes back with something that doesn't reflect the demographics of your community, you might ask yourself the question, why did it do that? What was missing in how it was created or trained that it had such a false assumption about where I live, about what my community looks like, about what we care about? These are the ways that we will really impact change is by being within the system, by recognizing where these fast decisions made by somebody far away mean that we are not represented, and then by telling the people who are creating these tools to do better. This is grassroots advocacy at its finest. It's where we bring together community lived experience with technological design decisions to build tools that better represent all of us. It starts by just dipping your toe in the water.
Absolutely. And moving forward with the positive, optimistic, and hopeful energy of Vilas Dhar when we use these tools. I love that. And you're honestly inspiring me to do that today. So I'm sure that our listeners are feeling the same. Okay, I want to close by quoting you directly, and
Oh
then
no.
and then I have I have a question. I really loved how you closed your last TED Talk. It was one that you gave last year called A New Code for AI, and you closed it by saying, and I quote, "The story of AI ahead of us is yet to be written. We don't know who the heroes will be. We don't even know who the main characters are. We know there's a chance for purpose to triumph over profit and for inspiring things to be done with these tools that will change all of our lives. What the plot lines, the choices, the context of the stories are ours to write. In this moment, we have a chance to ask, what story do we want to tell about AI and humanity?" So, of course, I'm going to turn that around back on you and ask, what story do you want us, our listeners, our communities, our humanity as a whole, to tell about AI and our shared future as humans?
Well, what a powerful question, Mario, and thank you for this discussion and the time we've had together. I love it. When I think back on what the story is that I hope we'll tell today, I think it's a few things. One is to absolutely acknowledge the brilliance of incredible creative and inspired geniuses who have created the tools of AI, and to put them next to the brilliant, visionary, and beautiful people who have created the institutions of public society, who have centered for us civil rights and dignities, who have centered for us a shared sense of public equality, who have shared for us a sense that every person has an opportunity to be something in this world. That we equate these innovators of technological progress and societal progress on one common and shared pedestal. And then we say, we have given you a responsibility to now design a society in which every one of us can be inspired and creative, can be ambitious, and can find purpose and meaning in what we do. And it's your collective responsibility. And because we are each there with you on that pedestal, our collective responsibility to design that future that we all need together. It's a way of saying that technology isn't something that's done to us or even for us, but that the society we create is an activity that's done by us. And if we could get there, if we could get to a place where we each felt a sense of collective responsibility and ownership, where we were equipped to make these decisions together, then I don't think there's a single thing that would keep us from realizing a society that benefits every single one of us and creates a sense of shared joy and happiness and wonder.
What a beautiful story. Speaking of brilliance, you are a brilliant man, Vilas. Thank you so much for your time today. At the end of every episode, we really like to give our guest an opportunity to tell us what they're working on personally, professionally, and tell our listeners how they can follow along with you or connect with you.
You are so kind, Mario. We have talked about what I think is my life's work and passion for the last hour. I invite anybody out there who is interested and engaged to come and be a part of the story that we are telling together. I'm easy to find and follow on LinkedIn and Instagram, Vilas Dhar. The institution is the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation. You will find speeches and talks and lectures, but also books and events and public conversations and places to connect. And I hope you'll come and be a part of this ecosystem where we believe that AI can be a part of public purpose, can be a tool for humanity.
Well said. Very inspiring. Thank you. Thank you for sharing again your wisdom and vision with us today. As you know, these conversations remind us about what's important right now and for decades to come, helping to inform and empower our listeners and everyone out there in this fast changing world. So thank you for guiding us on how to do good with this powerful technology. To our listeners, remember the story of AI is not written yet. As Vilas mentioned, it's being written by us right now through our choices, our values, and our shared humanity. So keep questioning, keep learning, keep growing, stay positive, optimistic, and hopeful. But above all, keep imagining a world where technology amplifies what makes us deeply human. We'll see you next time.